little bit of confrontation at the State House this week. We'll dig into what some of the Brown students' point of view is.
The Dan York State of Mind program is brought to you in part by Lookout Rhode Island and Takeo Comfort Solutions.
You know, it's kind of interesting whenever you dig into subjects like Syrian refugees and the like. It's difficult to find people to come to this program to actually argue against accepting Syrian refugees unless they are a couple of elected officials. It's a very, very unique situation. So if you are part of that group and you want to join us here, just let us know at the email address, which is on your screen, or the Twitter address, or whatever. Tonight we've got 3 Brown students who will join us, all of whom were at the protest this week at the State House, and I'm fascinated to hear what their point of view is on the Syrian refugee crisis. All right, great to have you in. Thanks for joining me on my State of Mind. Let us go to the rundown, which is over here on this camera, and see what's going on. Yes, the numbnuts. Are you allowed to say that on television? I just did. Is that all right, Kev?
Yep.
Do we have to start the show again?
No.
The poorly educated, the Donald, he loves them. Dual headlines, back to back to back to back. Yep, he loves them. By the way, I've finally realized there's nothing this guy can say to hurt himself. Absolutely nothing, including this stupid thing that he said 2 nights ago, which is getting a lot of attention.
We won with young. We won with old. We won with highly educated. We won with poorly educated. I love the poorly educated.
What is that supposed to mean? I love the poorly educated. Are the poorly educated instinctively smart enough to know when they're being handled? I just asked that question. First of all, raise your hand. Are you poorly educated? Are you proud of that? I mean, do you know what that definition is? Do you understand how loose-lipped and dangerous this guy is? I guess you do, because you love him and you're loyal to him, so he says. All I know is this. There's data out there that shows that there's an angry constituency that is voting for Donald Trump, whether you're poorly educated or not. The question is, will you ever think about electability? Because as more data keeps coming down, the chances of him being elected versus nominated are very, very different. By the way, the Brown poll came out. We'll be able to break that down maybe sometime in the next couple of days. Certainly on the radio tomorrow on WPRO. We did a little bit of it today with Professor Jim Marone at the Taubman Institute at Brown University. Interestingly, as they poll the folks in Rhode Island, 43% of those who say they'll vote in the Republican primary say they're with Donald Trump. That might be the highest pollable data that we have in America today, interestingly enough, in this very democratic state. Interesting. I just guess I'll leave you with this question. Does that mean we have a lot of poorly educated here? I don't know. So they got the driving privilege thing going on, and it's a contentious argument. Headline, the Providence Journal, and we've got the story that kind of explains the whole continuing controversy.
The licenses being proposed for undocumented immigrants are different than the ones the DMV currently issues. The bill introduced in both the House and Senate creates driver privilege licenses. They wouldn't be a valid form of identification. Senator Frank Chacon worked to dispel what he calls misconceptions about who would be able to drive here.
1, you have to be a resident of the state for 2 years. 2, you have to show documentation that you have paid taxes in the state of Rhode Island for the previous 2 years.
Opponents like William Perry are not convinced.
He breaks into your house, you don't say, well, what would you like to eat? You say, get out of my house.
What do you say to the people, the opponents here, who say that undocumented immigrants shouldn't have the right to drive?
The kind of people is not thinking.
Juan Garcia with the Immigrants in Action Committee argues if these Rhode Islanders can legally drive to their jobs with licenses and insurance, it makes the roads safer for everybody.
Protect your family, my family, and all family.
Governor Gina Raimondo supports the licenses. She has said it's better for a bill to go through the State House rather than do it by executive action. A hearing has not yet been scheduled on the bill.
People are really confused about this, and let me just throw a different take at you for just a second. You know, if they didn't speak Spanish, they wouldn't have a whole bunch of bigots upset about this. That doesn't mean that we don't have bigotry in us. And the language thing when it comes to Latino and Hispanic has always been a point of contention. And I promise you, if you just had an English-only speaking rally that says we need these licenses for a specific reason, you'd have less contentiousness. Now, you may argue that that would be, abdicating who we are, and blah, blah, blah. Do you want to win the argument, or you don't want to win the argument? As far as the argument is concerned, we are so confused. How do people end up getting taxable income and paying taxes if they're here illegally? Well, a tax identification number allows you to do that. You didn't know that, did you? Oh, you thought you needed a Social Security card. No, we are so messed up on a federal level, and this is a federal problem, as is the Syrian thing, which we'll talk about coming up. It's a federal problem, and the states now are freelancing, trying to figure out how to deal with it. I understand the argument for people who have jobs who are paying taxes to the federal government to be able to drive to those jobs. Don't you? All right, graduation rates up. I got a wabbit thing going on here. It's very warm in the studio tonight, so bear with me. Graduation rates are up 83% now. And that's something that the governor was celebrating at North Providence High School, where their rate is even higher. The blue and gold of North Providence. Beautiful thing. You know what? I couldn't be less impressed. So what? The park testing is miserable. Central Falls High School has an 81% graduation rate, and they perform at 5% levels on key subject matter in the park standardized testing. Now, this is whole movement away from standardized testing that we're about to enter into. It's a new valley or new low or new high, depending on how you view the cycle of education and policy and pedagogy that goes along with all of that. But, the bottom line here is that we might just be moving toward a shuffle them through syndrome again. Getting the diploma without having the learning behind it doesn't impress me. So if you're going to throw me an 83% graduation rate, wabbit, I think you better throw me some other data that tells me they actually learned something. That's just me. Yeah, so they had a protest, did they, at the State House? Well, it seems that there were two rallies converging. Let's watch this.
Pro-refugee protesters stormed an anti-refugee press conference.
You have no heart, whatsoever.
Sarah Zaza, one of the many immigrants voicing her concern.
Unfortunately, we were not able to hear everything that they were saying.
But former Congressman Pete Hoekstra of Michigan, who is also a former chairman of the House Intelligence Committee, tells me despite what was being yelled in his direction, he wants what's best for Rhode Island and the country.
Well, we're here to highlight the fact that allowing individuals into the country that can't go through a background check so that we understand who they are and whether they pose a threat to us from a national security standpoint is a really bad idea.
But the press conference really just turned into a brawl, with both sides attacking each other.
What are you thinking? What are you thinking?
With Zaza leading the pack, telling me these politicians are missing what's really going on.
They have not met the refugees. They don't even know what the grueling process that they have to go through to come into this country.
What are you thinking? He's here. So one of the stars of that piece is here. But Rick Salome is not one of the guys that was, were you doing the same? Asking what are they thinking? Were you, sort of?
I was asking myself, what are they thinking?
Welcome. Nice to have you. The Brown Society, tell us.
Brown-RISD Arab Society.
Oh, it's the RISD and Brown together. See, I should have picked that up. She wrote that. I just missed it.
Okay.
Before we get into the issue, by the way, relax, because I mostly agree with you. Why'd you crash their party? Why, come on, man.
Well, I think that their event gave us an opportunity to show state leaders that the Rhode Island population does actually want refugees to be resettled in Rhode Island, and we were able to make that message more strongly and more loudly, to be honest, if we did it at the same time that they were doing their event with the opposite message, trying to convince state government that there is not this kind of popular demand.
You think it's constructive when it ends up in a shouting match?
I think that there's nothing wrong with what happened in terms of the shouting match. I think that obviously tempers are very high. Now, they're standing there behind a podium with a microphone saying bigoted and racist things, and people without microphones, without podiums, are yelling back. I think what that says is more about the kind of inequalities in platform between the people on the different sides of this issue, between these, 45-year-old, 50-year-old men who are political players and younger people, people of color, women who are not political players. I think that shouting is representative of kind of the fact that we do not have the same platform that they had.
All right, when we come back, we'll dig into the issue itself. Stay with us.
The Constitution gives the federal government sole authority over immigration, and that's just been reaffirmed by a Supreme Court decision in Arizona. States don't have the ability to interfere or usurp the power of the federal government in that regard. And the second thing is, Americans and people who live in the United States have total freedom of travel. People in one state can't prevent people from another state from coming in. So all of this is an argument about much ado about nothing in terms of the governor's authority.
Chaz Freeman, a guest at the end of 2015 when we were talking about the Syrian refugee crisis in its intense news cycle moments. I'm not suggesting that it's not intense right now, but his point, as you could hear, was this is a federal issue. The governor's got nothing to do with it. You've already met Rick, and you've seen Ben, who got into it pretty good there at the State House with some of the folks who were there. Welcome. You get that this is more a federal conversation than it is a state conversation, correct?
Absolutely.
So why the State House?
Well, our protest was brought there as a counter to the protest being held by Americans for Peace and Tolerance, just almost comically named, if it weren't so terrifying. And it's been made a state issue, not by actual U.S. law, but by governors and activists who have tried to force it to other segments of society and decision making because they are afraid they're not going to win at the federal level.
I don't know what you mean by that. What do you mean by that?
See a lot of, especially Republican governors and also people like Charles Jacobs and Americans for Peace and Tolerance trying to bring this argument to the state level where they think they have more of a chance at victory. While they can't have any legal victories there, they can certainly have victories in terms of the way that this issue is viewed in the public eye, which comes out to be very important in democratic society.
Right.
And can I jump in on
Sure.
that? I think that regardless of what formal powers the governor does or does not have on this issue, it's important for people who care about the rights of refugees, the rights of stateless persons, and the freedom and the human right, really, to move across borders, that we fight wherever we are, and that we fight kind of everywhere that we are, because the issue is global, and it is everywhere. And I think that, if this is the place that you work, this is the place that you live, then this is the place that you fight this issue. I think that we need to fight it at every level, because we need to win kind of the hearts and minds at every level.
You said in the last segment that you thought, I don't want to quote you, but I paraphrase you, saying most Rhode Islanders support your cause.
I believe so.
You have the data that shows us that?
No, I think what we have, though, is the turnout for the counter-protest was probably 10-1 to this group of exclusively middle-aged white people coming here saying we shouldn't take Arabs and Muslims from Syria.
Listen, I'm not going to get offended over the idea that you're talking to a middle-aged, fat, white guy. So I don't know why you keep targeting the middle-aged, fat white guys who have this perspective. I mean, I probably have more of your perspective than not, but I don't know where the data is, and to be honest with you, I don't have a pulse that you're actually correct. And I say this with respect to your efforts on this. Be careful never to measure the pulse of the public based on the amount of people that show up at a protest. Well-organized protests bring lots of people. It doesn't necessarily mean it reflects the pulse, just like phone lines streaming on one side of an opinion don't necessarily, on a talk show, don't reflect the pulse. So I would be careful about that. What is it that you want to make in terms of the argument? Obviously, the president shook up a lot of folks, maybe fewer than you would suggest, when he said, listen, there's a certain number of these Syrian refugees that we're going to bring in here one way or the other. Obviously, he ran up against a big baboon, and we are somewhat suspended right now in terms of that conversation. But what is it that you guys want to say about how righteous that idea is?
Well, there are a couple sides to this. One of them is the more general argument, which is very much based in human rights and the need for these people to find a home and in the ability of the United States to provide that home. And that's the argument that we're having on the federal level. And that is a little bit different actually from the argument that we're having at this particular event because actually here, and part of the reason that I'm here is that I'm not just the head of the Brown-RISD Coalition for Syria, I'm also a member of the Brown-RISD Hillel community.
Which means that from time to time you're going to disagree with folks, maybe even on other issues, correct?
Perhaps on other issues. We haven't.
It's been profitable to me that you guys have had
about
some disagreement on some issues regarding, you know, the Israeli situation with Palestinians and the like. So I don't know if we'll have time to get into that, but you're coming from not necessarily the same unique platform.
I don't think that we, as individuals, have had that conversation, and I don't want to make any assumptions about your views. But certainly, this is about Syria and about accepting refugees. And in the case of this particular event, for me and for a lot of the people who I brought to the protest, it was also about someone trying to speak for the Jewish community of Providence in a way that was really, really offensive and really undermined not only Jewish values in a universal
I don't know what you mean. Who, what,
sense.
how? What do you mean?
Well, the segment of the protest that I brought were mostly Jewish students, part of the Brown-RISD Hillel community.
But what was offensive?
Charles Jacobs claims to speak for the Jewish community of Providence.
All right. Well, you have the right to say, hey, you're not speaking for us. People worry about security. They're worried about security. That's what they're mostly worried about. There is a racial tone to this. I think we all have to admit that. There's an ethnic tone to this. There's a lot of high-rising bigotry and worry. There's a lot of stereotypical Muslim political chatter right now and point of view. I think we all get that. But to the security issue, you say what?
Well, I would say that if you're worried about the loss of life of U.S. citizens, that, you know, the vast majority of U.S. citizens that are killed in violent acts are killed by other U.S. citizens. I mean, generally speaking, the refugee population is not responsible for a substantial proportion of the violence we see in this country, and there's no reason, I think, for us to suspect that that will change in the future. I think that we've been accepting refugees from all over the world, including many from Iraq after the U.S. Intervention there, and we have not seen the kinds of problems that Charles Jacobs suggested.
It's absolutely true. What people are worried about is one big bomb. One big terrorist act, one massive 9/11 plus worry. That's what they're worried about.
And their worry is, as you mentioned earlier, very much grounded in racial undertones, in some cases overtones, and that's not only having to do.
You can't deny the ethnicity of the people that brought us 9/11. So I mean, listen, I get what you're saying, but you guys have got to find a way to relax that argument. You too, and everyone else that has your point of view, myself included. You have to find a way to relax that argument.
Yeah, and again,
I don't think the president's done a very good job of it, to be honest with you.
What do you mean by relax the argument?
The argument that we have an Arab history, we have a Middle Eastern history to the terrorism that we are dealing with now. We have an Islamic perversion that is occurring in this world today, which is tied to this terrorist behavior, and it's a real problem for everybody. I don't know that the answers are simple.
Right. I mean, but we don't talk about the drug cartel violence in Mexico the same way. We don't talk about Latin American terrorism the same way. We kind of put on a pedestal Arab terrorism and Muslim terrorism as if it's somehow unique. And also, when we talk about violence in the Middle East,
9/11 is a pedestal. 9/11 is the reason why it's a pedestal.
But 9/11 is more an exception than the rule. The majority of terror, the majority of terror incidents, thank God, I agree. The majority of terror incidents in the United States are actually perpetrated by white people, and a lot of those include racial, ethnic, and religious violence against Muslim Americans. And the other thing that we're missing here that I think is often left out of this conversation is the immense, strenuous amount of testing, interviews, background checking, at every level of the government that people need to go through before they're accepted into the United States after being registered by the United Nations.
I want to invite you guys on the radio to talk more about this so that we can spread it out. When we come back, as part of the protest, it's always important to get a woman's point of view, and we shall when we return upstairs. You know, you got a smart Brown student when she's smart enough to say, Dan, you want to practice my name a couple of times before we get this thing going? Sabiya Ahmed. Almost. Second A is kind of silent. Welcome. Nice to have you.
Thank you.
Where you come from, by the way?
I'm from Brooklyn, New York.
You are?
Yes.
You're a city kid?
Yeah.
So am I.
Born and raised.
Well, I was born in Queens.
Oh, okay.
What's the better borough? Brooklyn or Queens?
I'm going to have to say Brooklyn.
Yes. Walked into that one. Your perspective, from a young woman's perspective, is what on this protest strategy, argument, solution? Tell me.
Just the whole thing in one question.
Yeah.
All right.
I'm figuring you could wrap it all up for me. Smart
Sure.
Brooklyn kid like you could do that.
I agree with most of what my colleagues have said here. I think that it was really important for us to have this protest, especially at the time that it was at the State House. And we were able to get so many Brown students to come out that day. It was amazing. And more than just Brown students, there were so many community members there from different kinds of organizations. I think the fact that we shouted him down was also necessary, given, as what Rick said earlier, he had a mic and we were students who didn't have that same platform. And especially when someone is saying things such as the things that he was saying about Syrian refugees, things that could potentially harm these people's lives if they don't have a place to go.
And what was he saying?
He was saying these people are terrorists, they hate women, he said they hate Christians, they hate Jews, they hate gays, and we could not let him get away with things like that. So we had to shut him down.
What's the big picture for you?
I mean, the big picture in terms of this protest would be to see the U.S. Accepting Syrian refugees. I don't think people in the U.S. understand how little amount of the refugees that we're actually receiving. I think this past year we received maybe 3,000 in total Syrian refugees. And if we think about the millions of Syrian refugees who had to flee their homes, we're receiving nothing. We're taking in nothing. And the U.S., this powerful country on the global scale, could be doing so much more.
And so your answer to the security worry is what?
My answer to the security worry is that it's taken onto the scale that is non-existent. I mean, there is so much that Syrian refugees have to go through before coming to this country. I had a friend who worked in Jordan with the International Organization of Migration who had to do intakes with Syrian refugees, and she saw the amount of paperwork and stuff that it took to get them, even through the process. I was in Jordan myself this past summer and past semester, and I got to meet with families. I went to Syrian refugee camp in Jordan, and I heard their stories, and I spoke with them, and all these people want is safety and comfort. And what they told me was that, can you please go back to the West and tell them to help us?
They'd also like to be able to live in their own home country. If the whole
exactly. They don't even want to come here. If they had the choice, they would go back to their country.
And that, unfortunately, is the big challenge.
Can I say,
you can say anything you want.
I visited this one Syrian refugee family, I remember, and the little boy, we asked him, what do you want to be when you grow up? And he said, I want to be a pilot. And we asked him why. And he said, so I can fly back home to Syria. So they don't want to come here. They want to go back to where they're from. But we need to do what we can to bring them in because they need a place to go.
All right, interesting. Final word when we come back. Stay with us. Listen, I think if you listen to Brown students, any students, or anybody who's got this perspective, listen, you probably gain something here. But, I think there's both sides of an argument. And if you'd like to join that argument, you're more than welcome to join us at any time. We'll see you on the radio tomorrow at noon on WPRO. And tomorrow night, here, Bill Reynolds on his new book about the Hope High School basketball team. Good night.